Welcome, IT changemakers, to the DEX Show with Tim Flower and Tom McGraw. Let's get into it.
Hello, changemakers. Welcome back to the DEX Show. Tim and I today, very, very fortunate to be joined by somebody I would definitely have to say one of my sort of, I never quite know how to describe your profession, Heather. I was like, I always think of you like as a business philosopher, people like yourself, or a strategic philosopher. Would that sound accurate, or would that sound preposterous to you? What do you think?
You know what? I struggled when I first started doing this. People were like, "Well, we need to call you something."
Yeah.
My path to this was not, typical. I had been in corporate, I'd been in academia, and basically I was seeing nobody was really getting work right. And so a friend of mine went on one of those websites that says pick something from each column, and she came up with future work strategist, and that was like a decade ago. And now I see there's a lot of future work strategists out there, so I think it's caught on.
You started a trend. There's a rapper called Post Malone who came up with his rap name on a rap name, generator. Yeah, that's where it comes from. It's kind of similar, and like Post Malone, Heather, you've made a big impact. So, but no, it's genuinely a thrill to have you on the show. You're obviously a renowned writer. You wrote the Adaptation Advantage and the Empathy Advantage, and I have to say I've been following your work since around 2020. Back in the kind of midst of the pandemic, I think it was around the time the Adaptation Advantage came out, perhaps.
Yes,
right?
Well-timed book launch, right? March
yes,
2020, great time to launch a book.
Quite so. Yeah, well, for listeners who don't know, Ben Heather, why was it so well timed? What were the key themes and what challenges were top of mind for organizations, not only in general, but maybe at that specific moment of time?
Yeah, so Chris Shipley, who's a technology journalist, and I actually met in Australia when we were both doing talks, and it turns out we were living like 8 miles apart at the time, just in Boston. So we traveled halfway around the world to meet each other. And her particular talents are just to put all the ideas that I vomit basically into prose you'd want to read. So I do ideas and frameworks, and she structures them into things that people can follow in the written word. And it was about a 4-year process for us to write the Adaptation Advantage. We saw technology changing things, and we saw really that humans weren't adapting, or weren't even really understanding that they needed to adapt. So we wrote the book and basically said, learning is continuous. You're going to have to learn and adapt for life. Leaders are going to have to lead differently, no longer about command and control, but much more about how do you effectively help people increase their individual capacity and thereby the organizational capacity. And this was, pre-AI and everything. And the book came out in April 2020, and the world shut down in mid-March 2020. So any book tour stuff we had, that completely collapsed. But it ended up being a bit of an accidental guide to the pandemic, because if you look at I believe it was either McKinsey or Deloitte said that we leapt forward 5 years in our digital transformation in the first 30 days. We went through this rapid, very rapid moment of adaptation, which really just showed us we could do it. Humans are more than capable of doing it, which it just created this. And if you look back through time, the same thing kind of happened with the 1918 flu, which ushered in the electrification era, or, the second industrial revolution, according to some people, the third being digital, and now us being in the fourth or the fifth era in human era in human history, which is really the augmented or the cognitive or the AI era. And so this really got us ready for that. And so that book, The Adaptation Advantage, became sort of an accidental guide to, which way is up and what do I do now?
Fascinating. So many paths we could go down from that intro, Heather. But since then, since we've, I guess the era that was being presaged at that moment has come on unmissably since then, shall we say? And we've seen many major shifts, from obviously the hybrid work explosion to the advancements in AI, and with it, constantly evolving employee expectations and changes to the dynamic between employee and employer. What are the biggest trends or changes that stand out to Heather McGowan during that period?
Yeah, I think we're actually shifting into a new era. So, it's very similar to what happened in about this time 100 years ago when we moved into the electrification era. We saw societal and cultural, political changes, global, geostrategic changes. Seeing all of that now. And so I think one of the things that everybody's focused on is they focus, I think, on the symptoms, like, AI or social and political polarization, which is they conclude is really social media based. Now, certainly an accelerant, COVID was an accelerant, but I think really it comes back to in the 1920s in the US, we about 25% of us moved households every single year. Lower home ownership then, most of it was rentals, but it was moving to that next great apartment or the next big house you could get. And it was part of your optimism and your risk taking. But when you did that, you had to join. You had to join book clubs and Rotary clubs and churches to create new community. And in that process, we created a high level of trust in each other. We also had high levels of entrepreneurship. Because if you were risking things and you were moving and you were optimistic, now we've got the opposite of that in the US anyway. It's 8 to 9% of people are moving every year. We have very low levels of trust. We have very low levels of trust globally, but in the US, it's really acute. Social media filters any of these societal, cultural, technological changes into your bubble, so you have an idea about them, which may or may not be based in reality. And I think that is a bigger challenge to us today than AI. It's going to link with AI because as artificial intelligence comes in and consumes more individual tasks, it's going to be our ability to collaborate. And right now, we've got the lowest levels of trust. We also have a global loneliness epidemic. When you're lonely, your amygdala goes into overdrive. You go into fight, freeze, or appease. You go into us versus them. So our brains are primed. At the same time, we've got this riptide of change coming at us, and then so much information filtered through social media. So what I think leaders need to do today is first realize that. They're kind of just focused on, if you think about it like an iceberg, the change they're trying to do, which is outside the water, this new business model, adapt to AI, new markets, growth plans, whatever it may be, without realizing that below the surface there's a whole lot going on. And once you understand, people need to be seen and heard. You need to build a level of trust and psychological safety. Collaboration is going to be essential to your success. And you have to understand these other tectonic shifts taking place as we move into a new era.
When you were talking a little earlier, you describing the sort of the process of regularly moving and then starting new communities, you made me think in a really vivid way about how much entrepreneurial opportunity there was in boredom, 20, 30 years ago, right? Before people had so much access to the world through their phones, how much business opportunity there was for individuals, not just in terms of building communities, but building commercial opportunities, hosting things, being a conduit for others to come together. And that's something that's really passed. And it's interesting to me, the concept of empathy, which you haven't touched upon directly yet, I don't think, has kind of come to the fore in your work. So we've gone from, I think, the adaptation advantage to the empathy advantage in that interim period of time. So maybe tell us about why that's an important part of the overall conversation and why that was the key update for you.
Yeah, a lot of folks conflate empathy, sympathy, compassion, and they're different things. Empathy is not, as someone asked me on one of my interviews during the book tour, yeah, I get empathy. And they had COVID fatigue, and they said, I know I got to feel bad for people, expect less of them. And they saw empathy as a path to lower performance. And I was like, that's the exact opposite of what I'm talking about. Empathy is, how do I help? How do I understand the people who report to me? How do I understand how to motivate them? Because we are never going to get our people to learn and adapt at the speed, scale, and scope we're going to need through punishments, threats, and rewards. It's simply not going to work. We can't use extrinsic pressure anymore. We need to tap into intrinsic motivation. And since most leaders today are managing teams of people who have skills and knowledge, they may not. They have to move from individual intelligence to collective intelligence. How do you move to collective intelligence? How do you tap into intrinsic motivation? How do you get your people to peak performance? The answer to all three of those things is empathy. How do I understand them? What are they interested in? How do I motivate them with their own interests? How do I get collective intelligence by tapping into their interests in being part of the solution, being part of, feeling a sense of agency? So it was empathy, not to feel bad. Compassion has a place. Sympathy has a place, for sure. And folks have had a lot going on, particularly through the pandemic and even today, But it's really much more about how do I understand my customers more? How do I understand the people who work with me and for me more? How do I connect with them anymore? And really at the root of that is curiosity, which I think is the next frontier. Is when the change rate is this high, people lunge at certainty. And this is not a time to lunge at certainty. We need more explorers who are curious.
And Heather, Tom mentioned it a little while ago. There's so many things that we could explore. We could probably stay on that one topic for an hour and just explore empathy and its impact to corporate life. But let's talk a bit about adaptation through education. Being in technology myself, I learned very early on in my career that if I don't learn, my career will die. I've got to stay up with the changing technology. But I think learning can sometimes be thought of as a point in time activity. It's very time bound. I'm going to start my education here. I'm going to stop my learning here. How that lifetime learning is a core theme in both of your books.
Yep.
Why is the habit of continuous learning no longer that nice to have, but really needs to be a strategic imperative for both people and organizations?
Well, for one, I stopped using the word educated because that implies an end state. And I use learning because it's continuous.
Great.
And we had this idea that, education took place at the first third of your life, got you on a career escalator, collect a pension, die a year later. So it was, education, career, retirement. Now I think it's learning, leverage, longevity, and leverage of that learning. So it becomes a combined act. That's what work is. And I've used two expressions. One, we used to learn once in order to work. Now we're going to work in order to learn continuously. And two, learning is what makes you more valuable tomorrow than you are today. And if you just look at our models of AI, when you test something, and you know this from technology, you need a certain period of time to test it. Now the models are replacing the prior models faster than the testing period. Yeah. So when technology is moving at that clip, the human can't just dine out on one piece of education or one piece of stored knowledge. And that's why that was part of our thesis in the adaptation advantage is we need to stop asking young people, what are they going to do when they grow up? Absurd question. We got to stop asking each other what you do, because that in some cultures, particularly in the US, we tend to ask people that before we even ask them their name. And when you do that, you solidify a fixed occupational identity. And there was some research prior, I think it was 2018 or so, when they found that involuntary job loss, so it was being fired or, reduction in force, whatever it may be, can be harder to overcome than the loss of a primary relationship. And sometimes people don't even get to the same level of well-being afterwards. It's because since you have a very young age, what you do is who you are. That's what we told people. And then by asking each other, we were fixing it to one identity when we really need people to have much more adaptable identities as well. So learning is what makes you more valuable than you are today. And so I think it's probably the Gen Z. I don't get too much into generations. I think there's important stuff about them, but they're not monoliths. They're the first generation, I think, that really understands that. In fact, I think what they're looking for from work is no longer the old, I'll trade my loyalty for security. That's a promise that hasn't been fulfilled in decades. And boomers might be the last generation for which that promise is true. So I say there are 5 M's. You need money, mission, mentorship, membership, and meaning. So money, pay people fairly. Mission, people want to be part of something larger than themselves. Meaning, people want meaningful work. What they do as a contributor to that mission and part of their self-expression. Mentorship, because they know that learning is as important to earning. And then membership, because work is one of the last places that a lot of folks can belong.
That's great. I love those. The 5 M's. I've got to make note of that one. So at my last employer, which was a while back, the learning mantra there was, if it is to be, it's up to me. And you talk about the importance of that, driving that internal motivation. How can companies create environments that encourage employees to take that same kind of ownership in their own upskilling?
Yeah, so first it's making stuff available to them, but it also begins when you hire them. So when you hire people into a fixed job, we used to hire people because they'd done the job before. So we're looking for somebody who's done this. Now we're reaching a point where we can't find people who've done it before because nobody's done it before. So we went from, in our progress, we went from hiring people who did it before. Then when we couldn't, we'd hire people with a degree in it. So cybersecurity, data analytics, what have you, because they were credentialed. but that really takes about a decade to build a curriculum, put a cohort through it, prove it. Then it went to skills. Where can we get people who've got badges or something in the requisite area? And now I think we're going to be looking at behaviors. So you certainly hire people who are credentialed. You'll certainly hire people who have past experience. I don't want to have surgery by somebody who likes to watch YouTube videos to figure it out. I don't want to drive over a bridge by somebody who's, seen something on TikTok. We want credentialed people in areas when we need them to be credentialed. But I think we're also going to be looking more and more at what are they going to do when their job changes, which it will. Yep. So hiring people that expectation, are you curious? Are you empathetic? Are you proactive? Are you pro-social? Are you diligent? Those kinds of things to look at, sort of like, you got through your degree, your certificate, your past job experience. You've proven some of those behaviors, but what do behaviors look like going forward? So you're setting up that expectation. You're hiring people who have agency, and you're saying, okay, these are the resources we have available. This is the mentoring opportunities. We want you to learn here so you are more valuable tomorrow than you were today, not both to yourself and to us. So you increase your individual capacity, you create our organizational capacity, that creates greater organizational health, that creates greater organizational resilience.
So the early concern when Google first hit the scene was that people wouldn't need to learn anymore. I'll just Google it. I don't need to educate myself. The knowledge is out there. I'll just go find it. Now AI has advanced, in my opinion, that concern even more. Not only am I going to ask AI, but I'm no longer going to get 50 sources of information. I'm going to get one response. So it's a very limited, it might be a very educated or seemingly educated response, but it's still one response versus kind of a research mentality. How do you see AI reshaping the way we think about learning and work and career growth? How is it impacting our daily lives as we move through?
Well, that's an area that I think is really important to pay attention to right now. So I like expressions that are easy for folks to remember. So I say, what we automate atrophies. What we augment enhances.
Yeah.
And so think about it. My handwriting is illegible. I can't remember a 10-digit phone number. I can't navigate anywhere without GPS. I've automated all those things, and what abilities I had there have absolutely atrophied, and that's across the board true for most of us. But where we augment, what we've found so far, even with the early studies on large language models like ChatGPT, when you give people those tools to ideally augment, if they just automate. So if I go to a meeting, I participate in the meeting, I use Otter or something like that to transcribe the meeting, and it gives me an automatic summary. And I look at it, I don't even read it. I copy it and I put it in an email. I send it to somebody else. Mm-hmm. I've missed an opportunity to reflect. I've missed an opportunity to think what were the most salient moments because I've outsourced that. And we become less comfortable with being uncomfortable. People don't need to say, I don't know anymore, because if I not only can find the information, but find the well-crafted answer, I'm not creating it anymore. So I think where we're using AI, it's really important. I think everybody should be using it. Everybody should be playing with it. But it should be a tool we learn from and with rather than just replace. Because where the studies we've seen is where it's been given to folks to use in the workflow, it'll take a C player and make them a B player. It doesn't necessarily make an A player. And it will take their baseline function from, say it's 70% to 80%. And then when the tool is taken away, they drop back to something like 60%. So it actually atrophies their cognition. So John Nosta, who writes a lot of great articles on Psychology Today, says he's concerned about the death of I don't know. Because if we don't sit with I don't know, and we don't sit with that friction and that uncertainty and bounce things off each other and try different things, we're missing an opportunity to build the most important cognitive muscle, which is our own.
So I had a psychology professor in college handed out each student in the class 10 3x5 cards. And for the final exam, she said, you can write anything and everything you want on these 3x5 cards in preparation for the final and bring them with you to the final. And I had them tiny print and color coded and indexed. I wrote everything down I needed to know. And by the time I got into the final, I didn't need them because I had gone through that exercise of researching it and writing it and indexing it, and I learned it. It was a process of learning, and it was a great, almost a psychological trick to get the class to really learn the material. It was a really cool exercise that I've never forgotten. But the need for upskilling of people and going through those kinds of exercises to learn really has to be a priority for organizations and enterprises, because technology is easy to change. You can distribute a new application to 100,000 people overnight, but the people are hard. The people need to transform and learn how to use that, what the workflow is. But it's traditionally been very difficult for technology people to get that into a practice of upskilling employees. What does good digital upskilling look like in practice?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I spoke at a CEO summit a couple of years ago, and in the prep call, one of the CEOs said to me, Heather, the technology is easy, the humans are hard. And he wasn't being funny or ironic. I was like, exactly, because the technology is only as good as the human that uses it. Yeah. So I think one of just to make a comment on your observation about being allowed to bring any information, so you recalled it and reflected on it repeatedly. So by the time you got there, you didn't need it anymore. My undergraduate degree is from Rhode Island School of Design, and at RISD, which is an art school, we learned much more about finding the problem and proposing the solutions than having the right answers. So we would go into a class or a situation, and they would tell us, ask us to find the problem. What's wrong here? They would take us to a train station and say, find all the problems here. That's much more of the kinds of education that we need to have to prepare people to seek for the questions, the problem finding, the problem framing, because we can access the answers. So we can access the information, we can access the answers. We need to focus on how we think about those answers and what they mean, as well as trying to find the problems. Now, when it comes to reskilling and upskilling, we've got to figure out, what are the people trying to do before we plug the tool in as part of the process? Because if you look at the Jetsons, for example, if we reimagined transportation in the future, back in the 1960s, it was flying cars, but George Jetson was flying his own car. We didn't even imagine autonomous driving then, because we were still thinking about what the human did, what the car did. Now maybe it's in the air, but the human's still doing it, or a robot doing something the human was doing before, rather than a systemic view. And so what we need to do when it comes to reskilling and upskilling around technology is, what is it we're trying to do? And where does the human come into play? How does the technology come in? What is it they need? I mean, Steve Jobs famously said, it's not the customer's job to tell you what they want or need. Right. It's to pay attention to what is it they're trying to do, what is it they could do, and where does the technology come in to enable that? We got to start with the human. We don't. We start with the human, we start with the technology, and that's backwards.
And it's a great conversation that I have in terms of our teams when we're out talking with people about NextThink and what we do. I focus and make sure that the people we're talking with have a firm problem definition. What is it that you're trying to solve? And many times they don't know. It's a vague statement or it's not very detailed. And the conversation in pursuing that problem definition can be very enlightening, because it then opens up all kinds of doors to different solutions. But you can't talk about solution until you've really defined that problem. I think it's a great way to look at it. And it's one that we try to emulate as well. In terms of finding a way to get people educated as digital transformation happens, one of the typical problems in IT, at least, is it's very easy to, like I said, to deploy that software. But technology people are technicians. They're not educators. They're not trainers, especially when it comes to a business application that they don't even know. They know how to deploy it, but they don't know how to use it. What role really should teams be playing in that broader upskilling and adaptation efforts in an organization when it can be difficult for themselves to even do it?
Well, I think the key is to show the gain of function, or the gain of time that might be saved. So if you look at, like, in healthcare, I do a lot of talks in healthcare environments. And when electronic medical records first came in, it was sold to doctors and clinicians and staff as being something that was going to be a time saving, and ended up actually being a time addition, because it was one more thing they had to do. And when a tool is presented as one more thing you have to do and one more thing you have to learn without an obvious, like, what's the benefit to me? I think you got to start with, we're doing this because this is the benefit for you. And like, you might have to go through an increase in effort to get to the other side where there'll be a decrease in effort, or an decrease in productivity to get to an increase in productivity, showing them there is something on the other side of that hill that is valuable to them. Because you're not going to get them on board to do one more thing unless they can see that one more thing will eventually become more beneficial to them.
Yep.
Brings us to digital adoption, which is, often something of a bottleneck when it comes to digital transformation at large. Beyond what you just described, how can companies better ensure that employees not only have access to the right tools, not only have a sense of the purpose of those tools, but can actually adapt and use them confidently and effectively?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's got to be a clarity of expectation. These are the tools we need you to use. What do you need to be comfortable doing it? Again, it's showing them that benefit so that they want to use it. And then sometimes I remember when my dad was the CFO of a nuclear pharmaceutical company, and this was back in he started his career, probably went from 1960s to 2000-ish. And when computers first came in, he was the CFO of a company. They didn't want him to be embarrassed. So they came and put a computer in the basement of our house. And they said, you just work with us. You start playing with us. We got a phone line for you to call when you have questions. We don't want to put it on your desk until you feel comfortable using it. And I think that was, it was a long time ago, but the same version of that. How do we make it so that people feel comfortable being uncomfortable, making it maybe private at times so that they can experiment with it, so that it feels like valuable. And as a CFO, I mean, it was Lotus 1, 2, 3, and then Excel, etc. Huge gain of function for him in terms of like gain of productivity. But he had to go through this like fear and this learning curve, and maybe the people who work for me are going to know a lot more about this than I am. So they kept it in the privacy of our basement that he could learn it. I think we need some of those kinds of tactics.
That's incredible. Yeah, brilliant. Look, I'm interested. Obviously, empathy is a big theme in your work. Are you one of those people who see with the development of AI as handling more and more tasks, as soft skills, as they're sometimes called, like emotional intelligence, creativity, leadership, do they suddenly come to the fore as what distinguishes a good hire besides adaptability? Do they become more important in this era?
I think it should. I mean, we're going through a bit of an empathy deficit right now globally. I mean, some of the cruelty and the division and treating each other in a way, particularly online. But I remark to folks, I'm in an airport sometimes almost every day. And an airport is the most anonymous environment where it can be the ruthless survival of the fittest. And I was in an airport in the last couple of weeks, and I was rushing to my gate like everybody else. And an elderly woman fell in front of me, maybe 15 feet away from me. And I've asked everyone this question: what do you think happened next? And everybody said, well, everyone stepped over. I said, no, every single person stopped to help. It was ridiculous how many people were trying to help her out. And then like a week later, I was in a food court. And then I decided a food court actually might be even more survival of the fittest than the airport itself, because people are trying to get their food before their flight. And people are elbowing each other to get in line. And this woman came out with a bagel with lots of stuff on it. And she just dropped it, and it went everywhere. And once she dropped the bagel, there was no recovering it. She wasn't going to eat it off the floor. People didn't want to lose their place in line. And everybody stepped out of line, helped her clean up the floor for everybody else. And then somebody let her back in line in front of her to get a new bagel. And it's like, humans are hardwired to be good, most of us. Technology allows us to be a little bit anonymous in a way that the cruelty rises to the top. But I am a belligerent optimist. And we've done more in this human lifetime to improve the human condition than all of recorded history. So I think we have a real opportunity right now. We need to make kind cool. I think we need to bring empathy back into leadership. The command and control stuff, which we're going through a little bit of that right now, I don't think that actually motivates people and gives you real performance. So I think empathy back in the workplace, helping increase human performance, not to expect it less. Because I think humans really do want to do hard things. They do want to care about each other, and they do want to learn and grow. They just got to be given the agency, the trust, and the understanding to take the risks.
Whatever, I was going to end on a big question and be like, how would you distill everything you've learned and your years of writing into something? What message executives or employees could take about the future of work? But I feel like you might have just done it. Am I right?
Yeah, that works.
It works. It's very good. It's very good indeed. Well, look, absolute pleasure to have you on the show, Heather. Thank you so much for coming on. As I said, genuinely been following your work for years. So it was wonderful to have a chance to have a proper conversation with you. And you have a great website, I believe, and we can include links to that.
I have a new website come out in a few weeks and a new show reel and stuff like that. So when does this launch?
This will be out in 2 weeks' time.
Okay, might have a new website by then.
Might have a new website by then. You'll find out, listeners, right. if you tap the link in the show notes. Heather, a great pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
To make sure that you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast player. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, make sure to leave a rating of the show. Just tap the number of stars you think the podcast deserves. If you'd like to learn more about how NextThink can help you improve your digital employee experience, head over to nextthink.com. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.